When you think about Captain Haddock, you don't immediately think, like, deep thinker.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
He's gruff.
Yeah.
Loves his whiskey.
Nah.
Famous for those epic insults.
Definitely.
Tends to kind of explode like a firework. But what if all that bluster, what if it's a carefully constructed persona? Like to hide some deeper insecurities. That's where the Enneagram comes in. We're going to use this deep dive to explore Haddock as a sexual 6, sometimes called the counterphobic 6. It might just change how you see everyone's favorite sea captain.
Yeah, sexual 6s are so interesting because they seem fearless, like always charging into danger. But this outward bravery, a lot of times it masks this like deeper struggle with anxiety. They're confronting their fears by running towards them, not away from them.
So we see this with Haddock. Short fuse, always ready for a brawl. But if that's not genuine aggression, what's motivating him?
It's compensation. Think of it like Popeye, right, in a spinach. Popeye gets his strength from that can of spinach.
Right.
Well, for Haddock, it's his beloved Loch Lomond.
Ah, the whiskey.
Yeah, it gives him this like artificial courage, to face situations that might otherwise make him anxious.
So it's a crutch, like to help him overcome the anxieties.
Exactly. It's not that he's inherently aggressive, like an 8. It's more about putting on a show of strength, to deal with the inner turmoil. And this is where I think the famous insults come in.
Oh, the insults. I mean, come on. Billions of blue blistering barnacles. How can you not love that? But, I always wondered, is he all bark and no bite?
He's the classic watchdog. Lots of noise to scare off any potential threats. But underneath that bluster, you've got a sensitive and loyal soul.
And speaking of loyalty, there's his relationship with Tintin. I mean, he'd go to the ends of the earth for Tintin, even if he grumbles every step of the way.
Yeah.
You think about, like, the calculus affair. He risks his own life to save Tintin. No hesitation. That's, I feel like, more than basic friendship.
That is 6 loyalty, right there. They're incredibly loyal to their, chosen inner circle, the people they truly trust. And with Tintin, we see something even, I think, more profound. He becomes Haddock's guide.
Guide.
Yeah, 6s, especially sexual 6s, they often seek out people who can give them, stability, guidance.
Okay.
To help them navigate a world that just feels unpredictable and threatening.
So Tintin, with his level-headedness and, clear morals, he provides that anchor for Haddock.
Exactly. And that's what makes their dynamic so interesting, Haddock, with all his impulsiveness and gut feelings, he helps Tintin see things from, a different perspective, and then Tintin helps him navigate the situations. They complement each other perfectly.
But speaking of tricky situations, what about Haddock and authority figures?
Yeah.
I mean, he's not exactly known for following the rules.
It's a great point. 6s often have a complex relationship with authority. But for the sexual 6, it comes down to trust. They need to believe in a leader's, competence and their ethics, not just their power.
So it's not so much rebellion as it is needing that assurance.
Precisely. And with Tintin, we see that trust, play out. Haddock respects him, not because Tintin's bossy, but because he's proven himself time and time again to be brave, to be ethical. He earns Haddock's loyalty through action, not titles.
Now, we see Haddock's character kind of evolving over the series, right? Take Tintin in Tibet. He's relying less on a Loch Lomond, seems to be tapping into a deeper well of courage. Is that typical for a sexual 6?
Perfect example of a sexual 6's growth path.
Yeah.
It's not just about becoming brave. It's about confronting the fear of appearing weak.
Okay.
Choosing to act without needing that crutch, that alcohol. It's a real shift in how he's dealing with anxiety.
So he's moving away from that reactive courage and towards something more genuine, more internal.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key aspect of the sexual 6. Suspicion. Haddock, always seeing conspiracies, hidden motives everywhere. Is that just his personality? Or is there something deeper there? That vigilance, that skepticism. It's classic 6 behavior. But for the sexual 6, it's amplified. They don't shy away from perceived threats, right? They meet them head on. Sometimes with a verbal explosion of, epic proportions.
Which kind of contradicts the whole fear thing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He's projecting this image of strength and confidence, but underneath, there's all this anxiety. How does that work?
It's the core struggle of the sexual 6. They project strength as a defense mechanism. The louder the bark, the bigger the fear they might be hiding.
Almost like a reverse correlation. The more bluster, the more fear.
In a way, yeah. And that cynicism, right, that sarcasm Haddock's so famous for. It's another layer of that defense mechanism. Keeps people at a distance, but it also lets him express those anxieties, about trust and safety and all of that.
It's amazing how many layers there are to this character. And it's not just what he says, it's like his whole demeanor. You
Yeah.
know, that stiff posture, the way he moves so quickly, those incredibly expressive eyes, even his physicality seems to reflect this, like this inner struggle.
You're right. Even the small details they fit into that sexual six pattern. It's all about creating this armor,
Yeah.
the outer shell to protect them from a world that just like feels threatening.
Makes his heroic actions even more interesting, though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's constantly saving the day, putting himself in danger. Is that just part of that strength as a defense thing, or is it something else?
I think it's definitely about like proving his courage, but it's not about dominance, like, what you might see in innate. It's more about demonstrating his strength, I think, to himself as much as anyone else, like overcoming that inner doubt.
Speaking of overcoming things, we got to talk about Haddock and alcohol. It's clearly a struggle for him and something he, feels ashamed of. What does that tell us about the sexual six?
It highlights, I think, that push and pull between like confronting a weakness and trying to compensate for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He hates that he needs it, the Loch Lomond, but it gives him that temporary boost. It's that counterphobic behavior, right?
Yeah.
Always wrestling with those internal contradictions.
It's funny, we think of Haddock a lot of times as just this like comedic relief character, with the whiskey and the insults. But looking at him through this lens, he's clearly so much more complex. He's a fascinating example of the sexual six in all its, complexity.
Absolutely. And I think what's so compelling is that his journey throughout the Tintin series, it mirrors the growth path of a sexual six.
Oh, right.
He starts off really relying on those defense mechanisms, but through, his bond with Tintin, the challenges they face together, he starts to confront his fears more directly and tap into this deeper well of courage.
And he does it without losing that, like, that Haddock charm.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if we see someone who puts on a tough exterior, maybe even comes across as aggressive. Could it be a similar defense mechanism at play?
It's certainly possible. I think it's a good reminder that sometimes, the loudest voices are trying to cover up the deepest insecurities. That bravado, it might just be a shield against vulnerability.
So next time we encounter someone like that, maybe we shouldn't judge too quickly. Could be a whole world, like an internal world that we're not seeing.
Exactly. It's a call for empathy, recognizing that everyone's fighting their own battles.
Haddock and Tintin, it's more than just like Haddock needing a guide, isn't it? I feel like they both get something out of that unique bond.
Absolutely. Well, Tintin provides that like stabilizing presence. Haddock, with his impulsiveness and intuition, a lot of times he helps Tintin see things from like a different angle,
Yeah.
They challenge and support each other in ways that go beyond just like, leader, follower.
It's a great example of how like different personalities can actually complement each other, bring out the best in each other.
And I think it highlights something really important about sexual sixes too. They might crave that stability, that guidance, but they also bring a lot to the table. Their loyalty, their willingness to like stand up for what they believe in, their, sometimes hilarious eccentricities, all of that enriches the relationships they have.
It's those quirks and flaws, I think, that make Haddock so relatable, so endearing.
Yeah.
He's not perfect, right? His struggles with alcohol, his temper, his tendency to see like conspiracies everywhere. It's all part of who he is.
And that's what makes him human. The
Yeah.
Enneagram, it's not about achieving some like idealized version of yourself. It's about understanding your patterns, your strengths, your weaknesses, so you can like, navigate life with a little bit more self-awareness.
And have some laughs along the way.
Right.
I mean, Haddock's never short of a good one-liner, even if it's, at his own expense.
Hmm.
Does humor play a role in the sexual six? Like, is it a way of coping?
Humor can definitely be a coping mechanism for sixes, a way to kind of diffuse anxiety, poke fun at like, at the absurdity of life.
It certainly makes them more fun to be around. Who doesn't love a good Haddock rant, even if it's directed at something totally mundane?
And have you noticed like how Haddock, despite all the complaining, he ends up a lot of times being the life of the party. He secretly loves being the center of attention.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's got that magnetism, that need to engage with the world around him.
And that ties back to that need for connection.
Right.
Sexual sixes, they might like project this image of independence, but deep down they crave those close relationships, those meaningful interactions.
Thinking back on all of this, from the Loch Lomond to his loyalty to Tintin, it's amazing how all these like seemingly disparate traits create this coherent picture of the sexual six.
It's a testament, I think, to the power of the Enneagram. It gives us this framework for understanding not just ourselves, but the people around us, their motivations, their fears, their unique ways of interacting with the world.
I'm I'm struck by how Haddock's like physicality
Yep.
reflects his Enneagram type. Never would have thought about that connection before. Can you elaborate on how, like, those details, the stiff posture,
Yeah.
how those relate back to the sexual six?
It's all part of, creating that armor we talked about.
Right.
It's a way of protecting themselves, right? From a world that just feels like threatening. Think of it as this nonverbal way of communicating strength and resilience. The stiff posture, the quick movements. It's like they're, always on guard, ready to spring into action.
Like, don't mess with me without actually saying it.
Exactly. And those expressive eyes, constantly scanning, taking it all in, a sign of their vigilance, their need to stay like one step ahead of any potential danger.
It's fascinating how those subtle details can reveal so much about someone's, like, their inner world.
It's all about paying attention, looking beyond, beyond the surface. And I think the Enneagram gives us that roadmap. It's not about like labeling people or putting them in boxes.
Yeah.
It's about developing a deeper understanding, both of ourselves and the people, that we interact with every day.
Right.
Recognizing that everyone's on their own journey, We all have our own unique set of challenges and strengths.
And that even the most, like, gruff and intimidating characters, like our beloved Haddock, can have, hearts of gold and a profound capacity for growth.
Precisely. And sometimes, those gruff exteriors, they hide the most unexpected depths of loyalty, courage, and yes, even vulnerability.
Speaking of vulnerability, how does Haddock's relationship with Professor Calculus fit into all of this? It's a bit more, how should I put it, complicated than his relationship with Tintin.
Indeed. Professor Calculus, with his, absent-mindedness and often unrealistic inventions, he represents this kind of like chaos that Haddock both finds frustrating and oddly endearing.
It's like Calculus pushes all of Haddock's buttons,
Right.
but in a way that, like, ultimately brings them closer.
That's a great way to put it. It speaks to that capacity for growth.
Yeah.
For the sexual six. While they might initially like resist change and uncertainty, they can learn to embrace it, to see the humor in the chaos and find, unexpected sources of support in the most unlikely places.
Isn't that what life is all about? Embracing the unexpected, finding, beauty in those imperfections, connecting with others, in all our glorious messiness.
Beautifully said. And who better to like embody that spirit than Captain Haddock, with all his flaws and his virtues, his boisterous personality and ultimately his kind heart.
I think we've really gotten a good look at Captain Haddock, what makes him such a compelling character through this lens of, Enneagram Type 6. Anything else you think the listeners should keep in mind?
The biggest takeaway for me is like, don't judge people based on outward behavior, right?
Oh.
Sometimes those who appear the strongest are actually, grappling with those deep insecurities, that gruff exterior. It could be masking, like a whole world of fear and vulnerability.
Yeah. So like Haddock's temper, sometimes you need to look beyond the surface to understand what's going on.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by understanding others better, we understand ourselves a little better, too.
I know I've learned a lot about Captain Haddock today, and I'm betting our listener has, too. Before we sign off, any final thought you want to leave our listener with?
Next time you encounter someone, someone who seems a little rough around the edges,
Yeah.
try to remember Captain Haddock.
Okay.
Instead of judging, maybe ask yourself, what battles are they fighting? What fears are they trying to overcome? You might be surprised by the strength and resilience you find.
It's a good reminder that, everyone has a story, their own unique set of challenges. And sometimes those who seem the most intimidating are actually the most loyal, the most courageous.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the fascinating world of Captain Haddock and the Enneagram Type 6. Thanks for joining us. And as always, stay curious.